forget that Zoom added an extra button to start a webinar. That's always a really good way to start things. Don't you hate it when software companies change the way things work all the time? Probably
how dare they?
Using Virtuous, right? But hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Virtuous Insider. We are excited to have you guys here for today. This would be our client spotlight. We're calling it our user spotlight today. So just a slightly different approach to how we do things here. So while everybody's coming in and getting situated, I don't want to waste too much time. We've got a lot to talk about, but as always, got a little housekeeping to chat about here. So first things first, we are going to record the session. So if you do want to get a copy of this, you wanted to go back and listen to it, you want to share it with your friends, you want to watch it on a big screen at home because you got a cool projector, whatever the need, you'll be able to do that. It'll be in the support center. That's where we have the recordings for all the insider sessions. Now for today, we do have everybody muted. That way we can get some good sound. But if you do have a question, please go ahead and ask that question. We'll be in the chat. We'll be in there chatting with everybody. But if you've got a question, please do use that Q&A box. That way we won't lose track of your question. We can make sure that we get that answered today during the session. And as you can see, we do have co-hosting with me today, Megan Donahue. She's in there saying hi to everybody in the chat, which is awesome.
Hey, everyone.
We're always lucky to have Megan join us on the Insider. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Scott.
And for today, we have a special guest. And that is Rachel. And you can see Rachel on camera. There she is. Rachel's the newest member of the training team here at Virtuous. And Rachel is not very far removed herself from being a Virtuous user. And so it was an interesting opportunity for us to really be able to get Rachel's perspective, having been a user and working in Virtuous, and then, of course, deciding she liked it enough to come work with us at Virtuous, which is really exciting. And so Megan and Rachel wanted to chat a little bit about that. Megan is the expert interviewer. Those of you who attend the Responsive Weekly know that. I will cede the spotlight for sure. And for today, we did just want to have a little bit of a chat about Rachel's experience, some of the tools that she used in Virtuous. One of the things that we were talking about beforehand, we were chatting about data health and some of the other tools that Rachel used. We'll see how that works in Virtuous. And of course, as always, if you guys have questions, send them in. We're happy to answer those. We would love to answer those. But with all that said, I will turn it over to Megan and Rachel, and I'll be in the chat trying to chat it up with you guys.
Well, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you today, Rachel, because you were a Virtuous user up till like 10 minutes ago. Not quite that, but you were on the ground doing fundraising and marketing stuff in Virtuous at a nonprofit. So to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your role at your organization?
Yeah, thank you. And very much excited to be here as well. Like Scott said, I love Virtuous so much and found it so helpful in my role in nonprofit that I was just like, man, I got to tell the whole world how awesome this is. So what I did in nonprofit, I worked a lot in marketing, communications, and donor relations, mostly on the back end. So controlling a lot of the data and configuration of automated tasks and so on and so forth.
Fantastic. And so based on your experience, we decided today was a really good day to talk about everyone's most exciting topic, the one that is so glitzy and glamorous. That's right, data health. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the data health tools you used in Virtuous and how they helped you do your job?
Yeah, I agree. It's not the most glamorous thing, but it is one of the more underrated things that we have going on here. So I guess, like, simply put, the information you put out into the world is about as good as the information you put into your system. And so it's kind of like doing dishes in that sense. We're like, I don't want to do dishes, but like, if you do a few dishes, it doesn't take very long to do. Once you're all done, you have a few nice shiny dishes you can use for whatever you need. But if you let them pile up for a while, it takes a while to go through them and clean them up, and then you don't have any dishes you can really use. And so that's kind of not a great situation when you're a nonprofit and you have all these contacts and you want to be able to really be responsive with your donors. And then you find out the data is not good to use. And when the data is not good to use, you run into a lot of issues with that. And that can impact your reporting, your communications, your query tools, your automation, even just your day-to-day relationship building with your donors as well. So for example, if you're about to send a mail blast, a mailer, you may notice some invalid or regular addresses you have on there. And you're probably paying a good chunk of money in order to get these out there in the world. And then you get a few kicked back. Well, you're still paying for those. So you're kind of sinking some cost in that as well. Another example is you decide you want to call a donor and the phone number is not right. So you just wasted your time trying to call this person. You have no idea how to reach out to them, or you email them and it gets kicked back and you just can't reach them, but they've been someone who has really given and contributed a lot to your organization. And that's kind of, a really not great loss to have when it was something so simple. And even when pulling reports, if you're looking at numbers of things, so numbers of donors or numbers of projects or anything like that, having duplicate records or contacts, as we call them in Virtuous, is something that can really throw off your reports pretty much. So you might think, oh, I've got, 350 people giving this week. That's really awesome. Well, if half of them are duplicates, that's way off then. So it's really important that we think about what we're putting in the system and making sure that it's not just the whole end of year spring cleaning. Maybe it's something we do a little more often as well. I'm reading through some of the chats that are coming in here, and I'm just so happy people are as excited about data as I am. So keep those coming. And kind of in respect to a lot of what's coming out with your communications as well. I know it's August, being that we're based in Phoenix, we're really looking forward to winter. So the nice thing about winter is that's when you're having your year-end campaigns and you're thinking about doing your end of year statements as well. And so I know it's kind of early to be thinking about those things, but it's still a good time to be thinking about those things. And while you might be thinking about the communications you're creating and all those things, it's good to start looking into your data cleanup.
It is. I think the data really sets the stage for a lot of things, especially if you think about like your contact information, things like that. Because I know I have, and those of you who attend the Responsive Weekly have probably heard me complain about this within the past 2 weeks, and it makes it sound like I'm much more like injured by it than I am. Really, I'm fine. But like little things like the names on the envelope. If you're sending out a direct mail campaign, as I've shared before with many of you, my spouse and I don't have the same last name. And I've never, ever given a nonprofit my spouse's last name as my last name, but sometimes I still get things addressed to Mrs. his last name, which is not my name, which is kind of like when you're trying to send the message of like, you matter, you're important, you're part of a community. And the first thing I see is like, you made up a name for me that isn't my name. Like even that kind of data cleanliness can make it have a real effect on your donors and how they perceive you.
Yeah, for sure. Even in just general communications, right? Not even just envelopes, but I've got some really interesting stories. Maybe if we have time, I'll tell them. Where I've gotten communications that were a little unnerving, and it was because of a flaw in like someone's system. And it wasn't just a whole like, oh, they put my name wrong. It was like they told me something really outlandish. I was like, wait a minute, this is way off. This is not right. But anyway, so things like that happen. And that's not to say like I don't want to give horror stories to like drive you away from even using automating tools. It's just more or less to show that like your data health does matter. And in the organization I worked for, we were pretty meticulous about how we went through our data. So Virtuous has a data health center, which is that nice little kind of like, I guess like a medical toolbox on your sidebar. But I don't think data health really begins there. It begins when you enter it, when you import it even. So, I mean, we didn't have to do that because our data was perfect all the time. And we just weren't worried about that, right? Yeah, that's
never
a problem, right? No, so we actually did use a lot of those tools. So in the import tool in particular, it gave us a real opportunity to go through contacts, especially coming in through lead forms, to really comb through it. And not just even being like, okay, well, that's in the right field, but really looking through, making sure things are title case. I mean, we were kind of that serious about it. We also had the opportunity to quick search contacts. So Virtuous will try and match it up, but it might not always work that way. And you're just like, no, I know we have this person in here somewhere. And so you can look them up and kind of match it through that way. Another feature in that form was being able to kind of autofill addresses. So that can kind of eliminate the issue of having an address that's like kind of wrong, like maybe the zip code's off a little bit. And so it was good to kind of standardize that in a way that's very responsive for the Postal Service as well. A weird issue that I've kind of run into is seeing fields in these lead forms be filled out like wildly incorrectly. So one example that I used to see a lot was that I would see birth years in organization name. You know, you can go through and be like, 1960 is not the name of an organization. That we're going to have to comb through that a little bit. But you have the ability to go through that, which is what really makes the import tool awesome, right? I mean, you can have the opportunity to have a human look through these things that maybe a computer or machine might not catch. And so that's kind of how we were able to go through and utilize data health in a proactive way. But we also looked at it from the data health tool itself. And I get really excited about this because I have never seen this kind of way of approaching it in another CRM platform. And I've worked in a few of them in various roles throughout my career. I really love the fact that you can edit contact methods right there. So instead of saying like, here's the contact record that has an issue, but you have to click on it and get there in order to fix it. No, it's like you can edit it right there. You edit the address. It tells you why it might be a little weird. You can edit the email address. It'll tell you like even if some emails have been bouncing, and you can do the same with phone numbers as well. So we've definitely utilized a lot of that. And I've really loved the fact that you can have options for it. So it might say, oh, this phone number is not right, but you're like, I've actually called this person and they picked up, so I'm just gonna ignore this. So I found that to be really helpful. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to look through, see if maybe like a street name was entered incorrectly, and if it can be fixable and it can be fixed right there, yeah, we'll go ahead and fix that. Maybe instead of gmail.com, someone put hmail.com, right? That's a pretty easy fix. Maybe if you know the donor well enough and you have a relationship built with them and they have alternative contact methods, we were able to reach out to them and say, hey, you know, we had this envelope returned to us. Can we get an updated address from you? And yeah, they've been pretty responsive about that as well. But to kind of add to that, Virtuous does have the NCOA running tool, National Change of Address tool. And we haven't exactly run that through Virtuous, but we have utilized that just in general. And I think that's a really, really smart way to approach changing your addresses, because a lot of people, when they change their address, they're not going to touch everyone that they will have that information. And so we can just be like, you know what, no, we got this. We know you changed it. And then we can still keep you up to date on all the cool stuff we're doing. So that's kind of a bunch of ways how we've used it. I found the manual merging of contacts to be really helpful as well. Instead of having to be like, all right, I'm going to jot down all the things in this one contact record so I can switch it over to another contact record. And it's like, no, you get to pick and choose like, oh, let's keep this tag and then let's keep this address and then just put it all together. And it's really simple. So that's kind of how we've used it at where I worked before, and things that I still get really excited about because, like I said, it's made going through data so much easier. So you have more time to connect with your donors, to create the communications, the emails, and the letters that you're sending out.
Absolutely. I think and then once you have that data that you know you can trust, then you can actually use it, because we don't have it and clean it just to store it, right? We have it so we can use it to connect with our donors. So what are some of the ways you used your now very trustworthy data in your last?
So we've used it to really help make letters very custom. So merge fields, those are amazing features that we have that allow you to input like first names, last names, gift amounts, and things like that. So our donors weren't getting these generic like, hey, you made a gift, thanks, bye. And like, that was it. It was, hey, Jeff, I see you made a very generous $5,000 contribution lately, and just wanted to give you like a big thanks for it. You're making a huge impact. All signed by the CEO and everything. So we've been able to kind of take the knowledge of how merge fields work, kind of in conjunction with data, to be really careful about what we're putting in those fields that are going to merge into those letters. So it's helped us really personalize those things. It's helped us to really manage our relationships, because now we have this up-to-date information on how to contact someone, rather than being just like, we have nothing on this person, and that's it. That is the end of our relationship. So it's been helpful for a lot of those things as well.
Fantastic. And all of those things have a real impact in a revenue standpoint, I think, as far as like you have the data so you can have the conversation so that you build the relationship and then you grow giving. Scott just shared that merging in a donor's name correctly has been shown to increase direct mail response rates by 135%. So this is real impact. And it's not just like, we have to clean our data because it's the right thing to do because someone told us we should. It's like, that makes a difference. A real difference. Someone asked if that's using the donor's first name or just names in general. Scott, do you happen to know the detail on that?
Yeah, so in the study that I looked at, it mentioned full name. And, I think it's because it was actually aggregating data across a few different studies. And so that's going to include the salutation. It's going to include the addressee. So again, sending it to the wrong last name. I have friends, same situation. They each have different last names, even though they're married, and the mail they get is bonkers. And if you do that, right, even though you got their first name right, all you need to do is just show one thing that shows, I don't really know you. I don't have a relationship with you. That kills it right there, right? So if you're going to do a salutation, don't do dear friend, right? Send it to dear Megan. If you're going to address it, get the last name correct. And that just doing that basic stuff, which we think of as like not sexy, again, that increases your response rates incredibly.
Yeah. And I see we have another question about merge tags and adding in the first name of a primary and secondary so that you could say like, hey, John and Susan. Is there a way we can do that? That might segue us right into showing how things work in Virtuous.
That's a professional segue right there. If you can't tell, Rachel and I are in the same space. So even though we're in separate boxes, you'll be able to see all this action here. I just keep leaning into her space just to make her crazy. But that was a very professional segue. Thank you, Megan, for doing that. Let's take a look at Virtuous proper. You're going to get me in profile here. That's what's going to happen. But the way to handle that would be the informal name. That's the idea that that's what I want to use if I'm addressing something to a contact. And so what you want to remember, the neat thing about names in Virtuous is even regardless of keeping the data clean and up to date, you also have control of the rules for how some of those names are generated in the first place. Right? So we're talking, in some cases, I guess feels kind of like deep cuts here. But if I go into all settings, I can go into my data customization and I can go into my contact name settings. Now these settings apply to household records. So you can see it says that right up here, the base type has to be household. Because for organizations and foundations, the rules are a little bit different in terms of how you're managing your point of contact there, okay? But from here, I can specify how I want to construct contact names and how I want to do that across these different examples. Because if you think about when you create a new contact, if the type is household, which is our assumed default, a lot of individual donors, right? A lot of households. All that we ask you to do is tell us the first name and last name of the primary individual. And then if you want to add someone else, you can have a secondary individual, tell us that person's name. We don't ask you what the name of the household is. We create that using our inherent business rules. So if you've got John and Jane Smith, I create John Smith and Jane Smith, you're going to end up with the John and Jane Smith household. That household will also have an informal name of John and Jane. We're going to use the first names of the primary and secondary individuals. So to the point of I want to write a letter, I want to address the primary and secondary individual. Again, the informal name is there to help you do that. But if you'd like to have some different rules, if you want those contact names to be more formal, I don't want it to just say John and Jane Smith, but I want it to say Mr. and Dr. John and Jane Smith. I want to use their titles. You can do that. If you just wanted to say Mr. and Dr. Smith, you can do that too. Mr. and Dr. Smith and Wesson. You can do that too if you want to. And so the three different scenarios we have here are the format for a record where you only have a primary individual, the format for a record with primary and secondary individuals, that would be me and my wife, same last name, and format for primary and secondary individuals with different last names. So that's tailor-made for Megan and her household to be able to do that. And then you can do the same thing for your informal name. Do I want to address people as John and Jane? Do I want to address them as Mr. and Mrs. or Mr. and Dr. Smith? How do I want to do that? You can even set your first and last name defaults, because we all know that regardless of your best efforts, there's going to be some organizations where you just don't have a point of contact. And Virtuous is going to require that you have a first name and a last name. Well, there you might use first name friend, last name of Virtuous. For example, you can set that up as your default here, so that then when the merge tool is running data health and it's looking for duplicate records, it's not going to give you a bunch of false positives and say, hey, these are all dupes and you need to go ahead and you need to merge them together. Okay. So you have a lot of control over that here. Now, one other thing, and I know we've got stuff coming in through the chat. One other thing I just wanted to kind of highlight here within the data health tools, you guys were talking about stuff that's near and dear to my little data nerd heart when we talk about data health. You know, we like to talk about things like automation. We like to talk about how that plays into responsive fundraising, but a big part of responsive fundraising is listening. And that includes listening to things like, what's your name? What's your address? Who are you? Like, we don't even think of those as being donor signals, but they are all part of responsive fundraising so that I can continue to have an ongoing conversation with you. And so this is very important to the responsive fundraising, methodology. And it's super important in terms of using automation, because automation is putting my data to work for me. And I can't do that if I can't trust my data. And a great example of that is, let's say that you've got an automated workflow for a new donor welcome series. It's probably one of the most common ones that folks are going to build. I want to get those first-time donors and I want to retain them. I send them a new donor welcome packet and a whole bunch of other things. Just imagine for a second that a major donor makes a gift, and because they use a different email address or because they misspell their name or whatever, that gets created as a new contact, and that major donor ends up getting the new donor welcome packet in the mail, right? That is a real world thing that has happened. Not to anybody that's using Virtuous that I know. I've heard of it happening in other organizations. I'm sure it's happened to somebody that just didn't tell me yet. But that's the kind of thing that, man, now I'm going to have to work doubly hard to kind of save face here, because we look kind of dumb because we didn't even know who they were, right? Super important if I want to do all that cool stuff that I got to do the geeky stuff. And I've got to go through and I've got to review my duplicates. Now, don't forget that the merge tool does not go through and find duplicates all by itself. I do need to come in here and tell it, hey, I'd like you to go look for duplicates. Or it's been a while, these are sitting here, why don't I clean it up a little bit? Let's refresh this. And you can see here, there is a difference between that run and refresh. Run means keep adding to this list. Refresh means wipe it all out and start over again and find me some new duplicates, please. And then once you've done that, you can come in here and you can compare, right? You can see these two duplicates. You've got a lot of data here to help make the decision. We added recently the contact type here, because there have been cases where you realized, oh, I have an organization and a household, and maybe I do want to keep those as separate. You've got that in here. You're going to pick one account that you're merging data into. The other is going to get archived, right? And then you can pick and choose the individuals, things you want to keep. Now, if you want to ignore this, you can tell the system, hey, ignore this. And every time you search for duplicates, you're not going to see that pairing again. Those ID pairings will not come up. Now, if you ignored it by accident because you had an itchy, clicky finger, and then you needed to go back in and you needed to fix that, that's okay. Rachel talked about how awesome it is that we do let you as a human being say, hey, computer, I'm smarter than you. I'd like to manually merge two contacts. Here are the IDs, easy enough. And of course, for anybody who is an admin, you can go in and view the history of ignored matches. So if you're wondering why you don't see certain duplicates, you can come in here and find out that it's because somebody way back when went ahead and ignored these two duplicates. Oh, and it was that guy. He's pretty bad, right? And if I do need to merge them, in fact, you can still manually merge them. That's okay, but that'll explain why you're not seeing those. Now, we don't have time to go into the import tool today. We did have our training webinar not that long ago on the import tool, gift and contact import tool. But the gift and contact import tool does so much of the work to keep all this stuff from happening in the first place. You know, that's really there. I've had people ask me, why do I have to review this stuff? Why can't Virtuous Giving just automatically drop everything automatically into my database? And it's because it's so important that that data is clean, taking the time to review. Hey, Megan gave you a different name. Do you want to update the record? Rachel has a different street address. She moved. Do you want to update the record? Is so vital. Like, and if you do that, like Rachel said, you do it on a daily basis. I do the dishes in our house. I do them every night because I can't imagine if I let them pile up. I mean, man, my kids, you know, every glass is one-time use, so we got plenty of them. Right? So if you just do it every day, you keep that up, it keeps you having a mess here in the sink. Man, look at this. We got folks coming through in the chat, and I can see in Megan's eyes, she's looking at the stuff coming in through the chat. We have other questions.
We have two questions. One is having issues with spacing in a middle name or initial. We have an issue when we don't have a middle name or initial, the spacing is off and we have to go back to eliminate the extra space. Is there a fix for that?
You know, it's a good point. So if I do want to include the middle name or the middle initial, whatever I'm collecting in the contact name, any value that's missing is going to have a space there. It's going to have a placeholder. So as I make the decisions about how I want to structure my contact names, I want to make sure that what I'm deciding is going to be the most broadly applicable for most of my contacts. And then if I've got a major donor, if I've got somebody who I know uses their middle name or uses their middle initial, and that's commonly what they use, the thing is you don't want to forget that you can still override those rules. So on any individual contact here, bring up good old Mr. Bob example. Somewhere along the way, he became Bob Esquire. I don't know when that was. But you still have the ability to come in and say, hey, I want to override the rules because I know that his name is actually Mr. Bob J. example. And it's really important to him that we address him with that middle initial .J because his father was Bob C. example. I can do that. I've now overridden the contact name and put in a custom name. And what that means is if I went in later and I changed my contact name rules, I change all that stuff, I can choose, do I want to overwrite customized names? I can choose it in those settings. Or do I want to say, hey, if I make a change to my rules, go ahead and change stuff, but don't change anything I've customized. Leave Bob as he is because I put a value in there. And again, I'm smarter than you, computer.
Cool. And then the next question is, can you give an example of how you would write in a contact name format on the configure contact name settings? Confused on what we would actually write as the format.
You betcha. Let's do that. Let's get back into there. Data customization. Okay, so here I've got all these different merge tags. Rachel talked about merge tags and how handy they are. And I'm using that here to build out my name. So I can use these merge tags and any other character or phrase, word, etc. that I want to type in here to create the contact name. So here I might want to put in, again, if I'm collecting title for the vast majority of my contacts, I want to make sure that's broadly applicable if I am collecting title. And I want to be kind of formal. I could say I want it to be laid out as primary title, right? And then I want the primary first name, and then I want the primary last name for just a record with one individual. So Bob example would be Mr. Bob example, title, first name, last name. Down here, where I've got a primary and secondary individual, well, there I could say that I want to do, again, maybe it's primary title, and, or if I want to be, saving space, ampersand, right? So primary title and secondary title. So Dr. and Mrs., and then I can put in the last name. Now in this scenario, primary and secondary last name are the same. So I can pick either one of the last names here, right? And that would give me like Dr. and Mrs. Smith, right? Or Mr. and Dr. Smith, whichever it is. If I want to do it with their first names, John and Jane Smith, I could do that too. So primary first name and secondary first name, primary last name. And then down here, I'm going to include both last names because the formatting is going to be different for the two of them.
Cool.
Excellent. Let's see. Looks like we've got one more. I know we're getting close to, no, are we overtime? We're overtime.
Oh, we are overtime, but I think we got everything that I see unless, oh, nope.
Yep.
Something in the
I
question.
saw one more come in. When you remove the name on the contact record, automatically add the name back in, including any edits you just did to the primary or secondary names. Now, if you edit the primary or secondary name, you also have to edit the name and the informal name. Yeah, there's some different rules there, and some of that has to do with whether or not you've manually set the contact name or whether we are automatically setting the contact name or informal name using the business rules that are built in. If you're using those business rules, the only case where we should be changing the contact name is typically when you add a secondary individual. We'll add them to the contact name. Outside of that, any other changes that you make, you'd have to change the contact name and the informal name. If you've overridden what's been set and you've typed in a value, we're not going to mess with anything you've typed then. You'd have to make that change. So the behavior is different depending on how you've set the names. Okay. We can keep doing this. I know we're over time, and I want to make sure everybody's going to join us next week. We've got our hour-long edition. We've got our training webinar. Oh my gosh, thanks, Christina. Christina said that it is so nice and these are fun times together. Again, Rachel, you did something good.
Yay.
That's awesome. And as always, I do like to leave with a quote from someone smarter than me. And so this time it's actually from Andy Dunn. We've been having authors out the wazoo. I'm trying to branch out. So I went back to business, founder of Bonobos, and I kind of like this, right? Because I think it really speaks to the nonprofit ethos. Passion provides purpose, but data drives decisions, right? And we all work in the nonprofit space because we are passionate about the mission. We are passionate about serving people, and that's why we do what we do. That's the purpose. But we still need clean data because that's what's going to drive the day-to-day decisions.
So we got lots of them. Lots of choices to make.
It's true.
Megan, any final parting words of wisdom?
No, I just encourage everyone, take a look at your data, use the tools that are available to you, and keep on building those relationships with your donors.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you, everybody, and hopefully we will see you all again next week.